I have been asked today to talk about what I consider the greatest challenge facing mankind, and I have a fundamental answer. The greatest challenge facing mankind is the challenge of distinguishing reality from fantasy, truth from propaganda. You see, perceiving the truth has always been a challenge to mankind, but in the information age, or as I think of it, the disinformation age, it takes on a special urgency and importance. We must daily decide whether the threats we face are real, whether the solutions we are offered will even do us any good, and whether the problems we're told exist are in fact real problems or non-problems. Every one of us has a sense of the world, and we all know that this sense is in part given to us by what other people in society tell us, in part generated by our emotional state, which we project outwards, and in part by our genuine perceptions of reality. In short, our struggle to determine what is true is a struggle to decide which of our perceptions are genuine and which are false because they are handed down or sold to us, or generated by hopes and fears. As an example of this challenge, I want to talk today about environmentalism. And in order not to be misunderstood, I want it perfectly clear that I believe it is incumbent upon us to conduct our lives in such a way that it takes into account all the consequences of our actions, including the consequences to other people and the consequences to the environment. I believe it is important to act in ways that are sympathetic to the environment, and I believe that it will always be a need carrying into the future. I believe the world has genuine problems, and I believe it can and should be improved. But I also think that deciding what constitutes responsible action is immensely difficult, and the consequences of our actions are often difficult to know in advance. I think our past record of environmental action is discouraging, to put it mildly, because even our best intended efforts go awry. But I think we do not recognize our past failures and face them squarely, and I believe that I know why. You see, I studied anthropology in school, and one of the things I learned was that certain human social structures always reappear. They cannot be eliminated from society. One of these structures is religion. Today, it is said we live in a secular society in which many people, the best people, the most enlightened people, do not believe in any religion. But I think you cannot eliminate religion from the psyche of mankind. If you suppress it in one form, it merely reemerges in another form. You can choose not to believe in God, but you still have to believe in something that gives your life meaning and shapes your sense of the world around you. Such a belief is itself religious. Today, one of the most powerful religions in the Western world is environmentalism. Environmentalism seems to be the religion of choice for urban atheists. Why do I say it's a religion? Well, just look at the beliefs. If you look carefully, you see that environmentalism is in fact a perfect 21st century remapping of traditional Judeo-Christian beliefs and myths. There's an initial Eden, a paradise. There's a state of grace and a unity with nature. There's a fall from grace into a state of pollution as a result of eating from the tree of knowledge. And as a result of our actions, there's a judgment day coming for us all. See, we are all in energy sinners in this religion, doomed to die unless we seek salvation, which is now called sustainability. Sustainability is salvation in the church of the environment, just as organic food is its communion, that pesticide-free wafer that the right people with the right beliefs imbibe. Eden, the fall of man, the loss of grace, the coming doomsday. These are deeply held mythic structures. They are profoundly conservative beliefs. They may even be hardwired into the brain for all I know. I certainly don't want to talk anybody out of them, as I don't want to talk anybody out of the belief that Jesus Christ is the Son of God who rose from the dead. But the reason I don't want to talk anybody out of these beliefs is that I can't talk anybody out of them. These are not facts that can be argued. These are issues of faith. And so it is, sadly, with environmentalism. Increasingly, it seems that facts aren't even necessary because the tenets of environmentalism are all about belief. It's about whether you're going to be a sinner or saved, whether you're going to be one of the people on the side of salvation or on the side of doom, whether you're going to be one of us or one of them. Am I exaggerating things to make a point? I'm afraid not, because we know a lot more about the world than we did 40 or 50 years ago. And what we know now is not so supportive of certain core environmental beliefs and myths. Yet the myths do not die. Let's look at some of those beliefs. There is no Eden. There never was. What was it that Eden from the wonderful mythic past? Is it when infant mortality was 80%? When 4 children in 5 died because of disease before the age of 5? When 1 woman in 6 died in childbirth? When the average lifespan was 40, as it was in America just a century ago? When plague swept across the planet, killing millions in a stroke? Was it when millions of people were starving to death? Is that when it was Eden? And what about indigenous peoples living in a state of harmony with the Eden-like environment? Well, they never did. On this continent, the newly arrived people who crossed the land bridge almost immediately set about wiping out hundreds of species of large animals, and they did this thousands of years before the white man ever showed up to accelerate that process. And what was the condition of life? Was it loving, peaceful, and harmonious? Hardly. The early peoples of the New World, they lived in a state of constant warfare. Generations of hatred, tribal hatreds, constant battles. The warlike tribes of this continent are famous. The Comanche, Sioux, Apache, the Mohawks, Aztecs, Toltec, Incas. Some of them practiced infanticide, some practiced human sacrifice. And those tribes, those that were not fiercely warlike, they were exterminated. Or they learned to build their villages high in the cliffs to attain some measure of safety. And what about the human condition in the rest of the world? The Maori of New Zealand, they committed massacres regularly. The Dyaks of Borneo were headhunters. The Polynesians, living in an environment as close to paradise as one could ever even imagine, fought constantly and created a society so hideously restrictive that you could lose your life if you just stepped into the footprint of a chief. It was the Polynesians who gave us the very concept of taboo as well as the word itself. The noble savage is a fantasy, and it was never true. That anyone still believes it 200 years after Rousseau shows the tenacity of religious myths, their ability to hang on in the face of centuries of factual contradiction. There was even an academic movement during the latter 20th century that claimed that cannibalism was a white man's invention to demonize the indigenous peoples. Only academics could fight such a battle. It was some 30 years before professors finally agreed that yes, cannibalism does indeed occur among human beings. Meanwhile, all of this time, New Guinea Highlanders in the 20th century continue to eat the brains of their enemies until they are finally made to understand that they risked kuru, a fatal neurological disease when they did so. More recently, still, the gentle Tassidae of the Philippines turned out to be just a publicity stunt, a non-existent tribe. African pygmies have one of the highest murder rates on the whole planet. In short, the romantic view of the natural world as a blissful Eden is only held by people who have no actual experience of nature. People who live in nature, they are not romantic about it at all. They may hold spiritual beliefs about the world around them. They may have a sense of unity of nature or the aliveness of all things, but they still kill animals and uproot plants in order to eat, to live. If they don't, they will die. And if you, even now, put yourself in nature, even for a matter of days, you'll be quickly disabused of all of your romantic fantasies. Take a trek through the jungles of Borneo, and in short order, you'll have festering sores on your skin, you'll have bugs all over your body, biting in your hair, crawling up your nose and into your ears, you'll have infections and sickness, and if you're not with somebody who knows what they're doing, you'll quickly starve to death. But chances are that even in the jungles of Borneo, you won't experience nature so directly, because you will have covered your entire body with DEET and you will be doing everything you can to keep all those bugs off you. The truth is, almost nobody wants to experience real nature. What people really want is just to spend a week or two in a cabin in the woods with a nice screen on the windows. They want a simplified life for a little while, without all of this stuff. Or maybe instead what they want is a nice river rafting trip for a few days, with somebody else doing the cooking. Nobody wants to go back to nature in any real way. It's all talk, and as the years go on and the world population grows increasingly urban, it's uninformed talk. Farmers know what they're talking about, city people don't. It's all fantasy. One way to measure this prevalence of fantasy is to note the number of people who die because they haven't the least knowledge of how nature really is. They stand beside a wild animal like a buffalo or a deer for a picture, and then they get trampled to death. They climb a mountain in dicey weather without proper gear and they freeze to death. They drown in the surf on holiday because they can't even conceive the real power of what we blithely call the force of nature. They have seen the ocean, but they have never been in it. Television generation that exists today, they expect that nature to act the way they want it to be. They think that all of life's experience can be TiVo'd. The notion that the natural world obeys its own rules and doesn't give a damn about your expectations comes as a massive shock. Well-to-do, educated people in an urban environment, they experience the ability to fashion their daily lives as they wish. They buy clothes that suit their taste. They decorate their apartments as they wish. Within limits, they can contrive a daily urban world that pleases them. But the natural world, it is not so malleable. On the contrary, it will demand that you adapt to it. And if you don't, you die. It is harsh, powerful, and an unforgiving world that most urban Westerners have never experienced. Many years ago now, I was trekking in the Karakoram Mountains of northern Pakistan when my group came to a river that we had to cross. It was a glacial river, freezing cold, and it was running fast. But it wasn't deep, maybe 3 feet at most. My guide set out ropes for people to hold as they crossed the river, and everybody proceeded one at a time with extreme care. I asked the guide, what was the big deal about crossing a 3-foot river? He said, well, suppose you fell and suffered a fracture. Right now, we are 4 days trek from the last big town where there was a radio. And even if the guide went back double time to get help, it would be a minimum of 3 days before he would return, and even then, only if there was a helicopter available. And in 3 days, I'd probably be dead. So that was why everybody was crossing so carefully, because out in nature, one little slip can be deadly. But let's return to religion. If Eden is fantasy, one that never existed, and mankind wasn't ever as noble and kind and loving, if we didn't ever fall from grace, then what about the rest of the religious tenets? What about salvation, sustainability, and judgment day? What about the incoming environmental doom from fossil fuels and global warming? If we all don't get down on our knees and conserve every day? Well, it's interesting. You may have noticed something's left off the list lately. Although the preachers of environmentalism have been yelling about population for 50 years, over the last decade, world population seems to be taking an unexpected turn. Fertility rates, they are falling almost everywhere. As a result, over the course of just my lifetime, the thoughtful predictions for total world population have gone from as high as 20 billion to 15 billion, down to 11 billion. Now they are saying that just 9 billion, perhaps even less. Is this a reason to rejoice, to say hallelujah? Certainly not. Without a pause, we now hear about the coming crisis of world economy from the shrinking population. We hear about the impending crisis of an aging population. Nobody anywhere will say that the core fears expressed for most of my life have turned out to be true. As we moved into the future, these doomsday visions vanished like a mirage in the desert. They were never there. Though they do still reappear in the future as mirages do. Okay, so the preachers made a mistake. They got one prediction wrong, the human. So what? Unfortunately, it's not just one prediction, it's a whole slew of them. We're running out of oil. We're running out of natural resources. Paul Ehrlich said that 60 million Americans will die of starvation in the 1980s. 40,000 species become extinct every year. Half of all species on the planet will be extinct by the year 2000. And on, and on, and on. With so many past failures, you might think that the environmental predictions would become more cautious. But not if it's a religion. Remember that crazy nut walking on the sidewalk carrying the placard that predicts the end of the world? Well, he doesn't just quit the day the world doesn't end. He changes his placard, sets a new doomsday date, and goes right back to walking the streets. One of the defining features of religion is that your beliefs are not troubled by facts because they have nothing to do with facts. But I can tell you some facts. I know you haven't read of them in any newspaper because the newspapers literally do not report them. I can tell you that DDT is not a carcinogen and that it did not cause birds to die and it never should have been banned. I can tell you that the people who banned it knew that it wasn't carcinogenic and that they banned it anyways. I can tell you that the DDT ban has caused the deaths of tens of millions of poor people, mostly children, whose deaths are directly attributable to a callous, technologically advanced Western society that promoted the new cause of environmentalism by pushing a fantasy about a pesticide, and thus irrevocably harming the third world. Banning DDT is one of the most disgraceful episodes in 20th century of America. We knew better and we did it anyways. We let people around the world die and we didn't give a damn. I can tell you that secondhand smoke is not even a health hazard to anyone, and it never was. And that the EPA, well, they have always known that. I could tell you that the evidence for global warming is far weaker than its proponents would ever admit. I can tell you that a percentage of U.S. land area taken up by urbanization, including cities and roads, is only 5%. I can tell you that the Sahara Desert is shrinking, or the total ice of Antarctica is increasing. I can tell you that a blue ribbon panel in Science magazine concluded that there is no known technology that will enable us to halt the rise of carbon dioxide in the 21st century. Not wind, not solar, not even nuclear. The panel concluded that a totally new technology like nuclear fusion was necessary. Otherwise, nothing could be done in the meantime, and that all efforts would be a waste of time. They said that when the UN IPCC report stated alternative technologies existed that can control greenhouse gases, well, the UN was wrong. I can, with a lot of time, give you factual basis for these views, and I can cite the appropriate journal articles, and not in wacko magazines, but in prestigious science journals such as Science and Nature. But such references probably won't impact more than a handful of you, because the beliefs of a religion are not dependent on facts, but rather on matters of faith, unshakable belief. Most of us have had the experience of interacting with religious fundamentalists, and we understand that one of the problems with fundamentalists is they have no perspective on themselves. They never recognize that their way of thinking is just one of many ways of thinking, which may be equally useful or good. On the contrary, they believe their way is right, and everyone else is wrong. They are on the side and business of salvation, and they want to help you see things the right way. They want to help you be saved. They are totally rigid and totally uninterested in opposing points of view. In our modern, complex world, fundamentalism is dangerous because of its rigidity and the imperviousness to other ideas. I want to argue that it is now time for us to make a major shift in our thinking about the environment, similar to the shift that occurred around the first Earth Day in 1970, when this awareness was first heightened. But this time around, we need to get environmentalism out of the sphere of religion. We need to stop the mythic fantasies. We need to stop the doomsday predictions. We need to start doing hard science instead. There are two reasons why I think we all need to get religion out of environmentalism. First, we need an environmental movement, and such a movement is not very effective if it is conducted as a religion. We know from history that religions tend to kill people, and environmentalism has already killed tens of millions of people since the 1970s. It is not a good record. Environmentalism needs to be absolutely based in objective and verifiable science. It needs to be rational, and it needs to be flexible, and it needs to be apolitical. To mix environmentalism concerns with frantic fantasies that people have about one political party or another is to miss the cold truth that there's very little difference between the parties, except for a difference in pandering rhetoric. The effort to promote effective legislation for the environment is not helped by thinking that Democrats will save us and that Republicans won't. Political history is more complicated than that. Never forget which president started the EPA in the first place. That was Republican Richard Nixon. And never forget which president sold federal oil leases allowing oil drilling off the coast of Santa Barbara, leading to a massive oil spill. Well, that was Democrat Lyndon Johnson. So get politics out of your The second reason to abandon environmental religion, well, it is more pressing. Religions, they think they know it all. But the unhappy truth is that the environment and what we're dealing with is incredibly complex. There are evolving systems, and we are usually not certain on how to best to proceed. Those who are certain are demonstrating their personality type or their belief system and not the state of their knowledge. Our record in the past, for example, managing national parks, is humiliating. Our 50-year effort at forest fire suppression is a well-intentioned disaster from which our forests will never recover. We need to be humble, deeply humble, in the face of what we are trying to accomplish. We need to be trying various methods of accomplishing different things. We need to be open-minded about assessing results of our efforts. And we need to be flexible about balancing needs. Religions are good at none of these things. How will we manage to get environmentalism out of the clutches of religion and back to being a scientific discipline? That's a simple answer. We must institute far more stringent requirements for what constitutes knowledge in the environmental realm. I am thoroughly sick of politicized, so-called facts that simply aren't even true. It isn't that these facts are exaggerations of an underlying truth, nor is it that certain organizations are spinning their case to present it in the strongest possible way. Not at all. What more and more groups are doing is putting out lies, pure and simple, falsehoods that they know to be false. I noticed this trend beginning with the DDT campaign, and it persists still to this day. At this moment, the EPA is so hopelessly politicized. In the wake of Carol Browner, it is probably better to shut it all down and start over. What we need is a new organization, much closer to the FDA. We need an organization that will be ruthless about acquiring verifiable results, that will fund identical research projects to more than one group, and that will make everybody in this field get honest very fast. Because in the end, science offers us the only way out of politics, and if we allow science to become politicized, then we are all lost. We will enter the internet version of the Dark Ages, an era of shifting fears and wild prejudices, transmitted to people who don't even know any better. That is not a good future for the human race. That is our past. So it's time to abandon the religion of environmentalism and make a return to the science of environmentalism and base our public policy decisions firmly on that. Thank you very much.